Under the moon's unblinking eye, shadows stretched like accusations across the frozen stones of Ravensreach, whispering that some souls were born to usher in the end. Isolde Morn trudged through the biting wind that howled down from the jagged peaks, her boots sinking into the snow that blanketed the citadel's outer walls like a shroud. At 35, she carried the weight of years not in lines upon her face, but in the hollow ache that settled in her bones, a companion as constant as the chill. The air reeked of iron and smoke, blood from the recent skirmishes, lingering like a promise unkept. Ravensreach, the ancient seat of the Alpha King, loomed before her, its towers piercing the night sky like the spines of some colossal beast. Torches flickered along the battlements, casting erratic shadows that danced mockingly, as if the very flames knew her curse. She had come unbidden, as always, drawn by the pull of distant drums and the scent of impending loss. Battlefields had been her cradle, funerals her hearth. They called her the Widow's Shadow, an omega whose presence soured the air, inviting death to feasts where none should gather. Villages whispered her name in the dark, mothers clutching children closer when her silhouette passed the thresholds. She brings only death, the packs would chant, their voices a ritual dirge, banishing her to the fringes where the wind carved solitude into the soul. Rejections piled like winter's drifts, a mate who fled her touch, packs that drove her out with stones and snarls, lovers who withered in her arms. Yet she endured, a ghost in her own life, her hidden gift, a forbidden right etched into her very marrow by the grief of too many losses, buried deep, unspoken, a blade she dared not draw. Tonight, the citadel thrummed with unrest. The moon hung low and bloated, its silver light bleeding over the snow, turning the world to a monochrome of despair. Isolde paused at the great iron gates, her breath fogging the air in ragged plumes. Guards in steel-gray armor eyed her from afar, their postures rigid, spears glinting like accusations. She wore a cloak of ragged wool, frayed at the edges from endless wanderings, and beneath it, the simple shift of an omega unmarked by claim or favor. No alpha's bite scarred her neck, no pack's loyalty warmed her veins. She was adrift, a vessel cracked by fate. The gates groaned open, not in welcome, but in grim necessity. A beta messenger had summoned her hours ago, his face pale as the frost-kissed stone. "The king demands it," he had muttered, averting his eyes. "The heir, the coup." Words trailed into the wind, but Isolde knew the shape of tragedy. She stepped inside, the snow crunching underfoot, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the vast courtyard. Bodies lay strewn where the traitors had struck, throats torn, limbs twisted in final agony. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the acrid bite of charred wood from a nearby brazier, its embers glowing like dying eyes. At the center stood the Alpha King, Thorn Blackthorn, his form a silhouette of unyielding power against the torchlight. Tall and broad, his armor bore the deep crimson of royal blood, now splattered with the fresh scarlet of betrayal. His eyes, a stormy gray that mirrored the winter skies, fixed upon the small form at his feet. His only heir, the boy Prince Eric, no more than 10 winters old, slain in the chaos of the uprising. The child's throat was a ragged wound, his golden hair matted with snow and gore, his small hand clutching a wooden carving of a raven, the sigil of their line. The pack gathered in a semicircle, their howls silenced into murmurs of rage and grief. Alphas and betas alike, furred cloaks heavy with frost, their breaths sinking in a collective lament. Thorn's face was a mask carved from granite, but Isolde saw the fracture beneath, the guilt that gnawed at him like a hidden thorn. He had been a king of duty, ethical to a fault, his melancholy a quiet storm that drove him to protect his realm at any cost. Yet tonight, that duty had failed him. The coup, whispered to be led by a rival alpha from the eastern clans, had pierced the heart of his legacy. They dragged her forward then, the beta's grips bruising her arms, their snarls low and venomous. "The widow's shadow," one spat, shoving her to her knees beside the boy's body. The snow seeped through her shift, cold as betrayal, numbing her skin, but not the fire in her chest. The pack's chants rose, a rhythmic condemnation. She brings only death. Let her prove it now. Thorn's gaze met hers, not with pity, but with a desperate command. "If the tales are true," he said, his voice a rumble like distant thunder, "cross the threshold for him, or we all perish in this shadow." Isolde's heart pounded, a wild drum against her ribs. The rite stirred within her, carved by grief's unyielding hand, a forbidden weaving of blood and moon's grace, the gift of a pathfinder who walked between worlds. To use it meant paying the toll, years shaved from her life, vitality drained like wine from a cracked chalice. The boy's eyes, sightless and blue as glacial depths, stared up at her. Death had followed her, not as curse but as companion, a threshold she alone could navigate. Trembling, she extended her hand, tracing the wound with fingers that burned like frost fire. The wind howled louder, as if the Deusa herself leaned in to witness. Blood welled anew under her touch, warm against the cold, and the moon above pulsed, casting its light like a benediction or a judgment. In that moment, amid the circle of accusatory eyes, Isolde whispered the ancient words, her voice a thread of silver in the night. The rite ignited, pulling at her essence, years unraveling like mist. The boy's chest heaved once, twice, a gasp tearing from his lips. Gasps rippled through the pack, but Isolde felt the cost settle deep, a weariness that aged her in heartbeats, her vision blurring at the edges. Thorn knelt beside her, his hand hovering, not touching, as life flickered back into the heir's eyes. "What have you done?" he murmured, guilt and awe warring in his tone. But the pack's chants shifted, suspicion coiling like smoke. She had crossed the threshold, but at what price to them all? The moon watched, silent arbiter, as the first seeds of redemption, or ruin, took root in the snow-stained stone. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, his blue eyes fluttering open to the merciless glare of torches, confusion etching lines on his pale face. Isolde pulled her hand back, the warmth of his returning blood now a ghost on her skin, replaced by a deeper chill that seeped into her marrow. The rite had claimed its toll, 5 years, perhaps more, stripped away in that silver-threaded whisper, leaving her limbs heavy as leaden chains. She swayed on her knees, the snow beneath her melting into a crimson slush that soaked her shift, the metallic scent rising like an offering to the indifferent moon. Thorn's hand finally descended, steadying her shoulder with a grip that was neither gentle nor cruel, but inevitable, like the weight of winter itself. His touch burned through the wool, a spark of alpha heat against her omega frailty, stirring something primal and unwelcome in her veins. She met his gaze, those stormy eyes now fractured with a vulnerability he could not hide, a king's guilt laid bare, the ethical core of him warring with the duty that had summoned her here. "You have given what no other could," he said, his voice low, threaded with gravel from unshed grief. "But the pack, they see only the shadow you cast." Murmurs swelled around them, the semicircle of wolves tightening like a noose, faces twisted in the firelight, alphas with scars from old wars, betas clutching weapons still slick with traitor blood, omegas huddled in the rear, their eyes wide with superstitious dread. The chants had ceased, but suspicion coiled in their stares, a venom that promised exile or worse. "She defies the natural order," a burly beta growled, his furred cloak dusted with frost. "What if her touch poisons the air anew? The coup was ill omen enough. Now this witchery invites the Deuce's wrath." Isolde rose unsteadily, brushing off Thorn's hand not from defiance, but from the instinctive recoil of one too often burned by proximity. The wind whipped through the courtyard, carrying distant weavos from the peaks, a lament that echoed her isolation. She had crossed thresholds before, battlefields where mates fell at her side, villages that emptied at her approach. But this was different. Here, in the heart of Ravensreach, with the Alpha King's air breathing because of her, the curse felt like a blade turned inward. Death had followed her, yes, but tonight it had bent, reshaped by her will. Was this redemption, or merely another layer of the shroud? Thorn stepped between her and the encroaching pack, his broad frame a bulwark of steel and shadow. The crimson stains on his armor gleamed like accusations under the moon's pale scrutiny, and she caught the faint tremor in his jaw. A melancholy king, haunted by the coup's betrayal, his ethical code demanding he protect even the outcast who had saved his line. "Enough," he commanded, his rumble cutting through the night like a blade through silk. "She is under my safeguard until the dawn. The Eastern rival's spies still lurk in these walls. We cannot afford division now." The pack parted reluctantly, their footsteps crunching in the snow as they dispersed toward the inner keep, casting backward glances laced with fear. Isolde felt the pull of that fear, instinctive and raw, her omega senses attuned to the undercurrents of threat. Yet beneath it, curiosity flickered, an Alpha's presence so close, unmarred by the rejection she knew too well. Thorn turned to her then, his expression unreadable in the torch's flicker, the golden raven sigil on his breastplate catching the light like a talisman of lost legacy. "Come," he said simply, gesturing toward a shadowed archway leading to the citadel's undercroft. "The boy needs rest, and you need answers as much as I." She followed, the connection between them tentative. Born not of desire, but of shared peril, a king's flight from his own failures, an Omega's exile from the world's warmth. The undercroft stairs descended into a cavern of ancient stone, lit by sputtering braziers that cast elongated shadows dancing like specters on the walls. The air grew thicker, laced with the earthy musk of damp rock and the faint, herbal tang of healing salves. Eric was carried ahead by loyal betas, his small form limp in their arms, the wooden raven carving still clutched in his fist, a symbol that now bound them all, innocent and ominous. In a chamber hollowed from the mountain's heart, Thorn halted, his back to her as he watched the healers tend the boy. Isolde lingered by the threshold, the cold stone pressing against her spine, her body aching from the rite's theft. Fear gnawed at her, fear of this king's scrutiny, of the instinctual draw toward his strength, rationalized away as mere survival. He was broken in his way, marked by the guilt of a realm teetering on coup's edge, his melancholy a quiet fire that warmed the space between them despite the chill. "Why you?" he asked without turning, his voice echoing softly. "The tales speak of your shadow, but not this. Gift. Is it a blessing of the Diusa, or a chain forged in blood?" She hesitated, the words heavy on her tongue. "It is neither," she replied, her voice a whisper carried on the cavern's breath. "Grief carves the path, and I walk it. Death is no stranger. I merely open the door." Their eyes met in the fire's glow, a spark of understanding amid the denial, curiosity edging toward something deeper, resisted by the walls they each had built. As the night deepened, scouts burst into the chamber, their faces gaunt with urgency. "The traitors rally beyond the eastern pass," one panted, snow melting from his boots. "The rival Alpha marches with shadow wolves at his flank." Thorn's hand clenched, the weight of command settling like frost on his shoulders. In that moment, with enemies closing in, Isolde felt the shift, an unspoken alliance forming in the face of common ruin. They would seek refuge in the hidden tunnels beneath Ravensreach, a labyrinth of ice and forgotten lore, where empathy might forge a bond stronger than blood. The moon's light filtered through a high crevice, silvering the raven carving in Eiric's hand, a promise of trials yet to come. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The labyrinth of tunnels beneath Raven's Reach uncoiled like the veins of the earth itself, cold and unyielding, their walls veined with veins of glittering ice that caught the faint glow of the torch Thorn carried. Isolde followed at a measured distance, her steps muffled by the packed snow that dusted the stone floor, each footfall sending a tremor through her weary frame. The rite's toll lingered like a shadow within, her breath shallower now, the years it had stolen manifesting as a subtle ache in her joints, a reminder that life was a currency spent in the dark. Eric walked unsteadily between two betas, his small hand gripping the wooden raven as if it were the only anchor to the world he had glimpsed beyond death's veil. The boy's blue eyes darted to her occasionally, wide with unspoken questions, but he said nothing, his silence a fragile bridge across the chasm of what she had wrought. Thorn led them deeper, his broad shoulders navigating the narrow passages with the assurance of one who had mapped these hidden paths in his youth, before the crown's weight had etched melancholy into his bones. The air grew denser, laced with the mineral tang of underground springs and the faint, acrid echo of distant forges long extinguished. No wind pierced here, but the absence of it pressed upon Isolde like a held breath, amplifying the rhythm of their footfalls, the king's steady stride, the beta's wary vigilance, the child's hesitant shuffle. She felt the pull of him ahead, that alpha presence, a gravitational force she resisted with every rational fiber, attributing the warmth blooming in her chest to the shared peril rather than the instinctive draw of Omega to King. He was broken, yes, his ethical resolve cracked by the coup's betrayal, guilt shadowing his every command like the frost on these walls. Yet in his protection of her, she sensed not pity, but a quiet recognition, a fellow wanderer in the wilderness of duty and loss. They emerged into a cavern chamber, vast and vaulted, where bioluminescent fungi clung to the ceiling like stars fallen from the moon's embrace, casting a soft, ethereal blue over the space. A natural pool steamed at the center, fed by thermal vents that defied the winter above, its surface rippling with whispers of hidden warmth. Thorn set down the torch, its flame sputtering against the damp stone, and turned to the betas. "Bar the eastern fork," he ordered, his voice a low rumble that resonated off the walls. "The rivals' shadow wolves will sniff out any trail. We hold here until dawn breaks the siege." The betas nodded, melting into the shadows with weapons drawn, their forms swallowed by the tunnel's maw. Eric sank onto a ledge of smooth rock, curling into himself, the raven carving pressed to his chest. Isolde knelt beside him, drawn by the boy's vulnerability, her hand hovering before she withdrew it. Touch had always been her curse's prelude. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly, her voice threading through the chamber's hush like silver mist. He shook his head, but his eyes, still ringed with the pallor of the grave, betrayed the lie. "I saw." "Nothing," he murmured, "but felt you pulling me back, like a thread through ice." Her heart clenched, the empathy stirring unbidden, a warmth that clashed with the chill seeping from the stone. She had crossed thresholds for others before, but never had the returned soul looked at her without fear, only with a child's raw wonder mirroring the curiosity she harbored for this king who had not cast her out. Thorn approached, shedding his bloodied cloak to reveal the linen tunic beneath, stained with the night's violence. He knelt across from her, the steam from the pool curling between them like a veil, carrying the faint scent of sulfur and earth. His gray eyes, stormy as the peaks above, held hers without flinching, the guilt in them softening into something akin to alliance. "You paid dearly for this," he said, glancing at Eirik. "The right. It marks you further in their eyes. Witchery, they call it, but I see truth, a pathfinder's grace, perhaps, woven from the Deuce's own sorrow. His words carried no accusation, only the weight of his own burdens. The ethical king, who had summoned death's shadow to his hall, now bound to her by the life she restored. Isolde felt the bond flicker, instinctive and denied, her omega senses attuned to the steady beat of his heart, a counterpoint to her own erratic pulse. She rationalized it as necessity, the common enemy closing in. The rival alphas march a tide of war and treason that threatened them all. From the tunnels came the first echoes of pursuit, muffled snarls, the scrape of claws on stone, uivos muted by the labyrinth's twists. Thorn rose, drawing a dagger from his belt, its blade etched with ancient runes that gleamed in the fungi's glow. "They come," he warned, positioning himself at the chamber's mouth. Isolde stood, her body protesting the movement, but instinct sharpened her senses. The scent of encroaching fur and fury, the vibration of paws pounding like war drums. She had no weapon, only the rite's echo humming in her veins, a forbidden power she guarded like a wound. Eric clutched her shift, his small form pressing close, and in that touch, empathy bloomed. Not pity, but a shared fragility. The boy who had tasted death and the Omega who ferried souls across it. The first shadow wolf burst through, a beast of midnight fur and glowing amber eyes, its jaws foaming with rabid loyalty to the eastern rival. Thorn met it mid-leap, dagger sinking into its flank with a wet thud, blood spraying hot and coppery across the stone. The creature's yelp echoed, a visceral cry that stirred the air, but more followed, 3, then 5, their forms a blur of teeth and claw in the dim light. Isolde pulled Eric behind a stalagmite, her heart thundering, the steam from the pool now a shroud that blurred the chaos. She watched Thorn fight, his movements a dance of controlled fury, ethical even in violence, striking to disable, not destroy, his melancholy evident in the hesitation before each blow. A wolf lunged at his side, and without thought, Isolde whispered the rite's fragment, a pulse of moon-touched will that made the beast falter, its eyes glazing as if glimpsing the threshold. He dispatched the last with a grunt, chest heaving, a shallow gash weeping red down his arm. The chamber fell silent, save for the drip of water and their ragged breaths. The blood pooling like spilled wine on the floor, its deep crimson catching the blue glow. Thorn turned to her, wiping his blade, the wound's sting pulling a wince he quickly masked. "You aided without command," he said, stepping closer, the heat of him cutting through the chill. Their eyes locked, the connection deepening. Not love, but a bond forged in refuge's fire, empathy threading through the fear. She nodded, feeling the shift, curiosity yielding to trust, however tentative, as the distant uivos warned of more foes. In this hidden heart of the mountain, with the boy safe between them, they were no longer king and outcast, but allies against the storm. Yet, as the night wore on, Isolde sensed the rite's deeper cost, a vision flickering at her edges. The Deuce's whisper, hinting at revelations yet to unfold. The raven carving in Eric's hand seemed to pulse, a symbol binding their fates as the tunnels trembled with the weight of approaching war. The steam from the thermal pool coiled higher in the cavern, veiling the aftermath of the skirmish in a haze that blurred the edges of blood and stone, as if the earth itself sought to soften the night's cruelties. Isolde's pulse thrummed in her ears, a relentless cadence syncing with the distant tremors echoing through the tunnels. More shadow wolves, or perhaps the rival Alpha's vanguard, their approach a low growl woven into the mountain's breath. She released Eric's shift, the boy's fingers lingering on the fabric before he drew back. His small frame trembling not from cold, but from the echo of violence that still hung in the air like acrid smoke. The raven carving lay between them on the damp rock, its wooden eyes seeming to watch, a silent sentinel carved from the same ancient oak as the citadel's throne. Thorn sheathed his dagger with a deliberate motion, the metallic scrape cutting through the hush. His wounded arm held close to his side, where blood seeped through the torn linen, staining it a deeper crimson that matched the pools congealing on the floor. He did not wince, but Isolde saw the flicker in his gray eyes, the ethical king suppressing pain to shield those under his charge, his melancholy a veil over the guilt that the coup had unearthed like a buried blade. She rose slowly, her body protesting with a bone-deep weariness, the rights theft of years now a constant undercurrent, sapping the warmth from her limbs. Yet in this refuge, amid the blue glow of fungi and the mineral scent of hidden waters, something stirred within her, unbidden and insistent, the Pathfinder's gift, no longer a mere whisper but a rising tide, pressing against the confines of her will. "You should bind that wound," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, gesturing to his arm. The words emerged not from command, but from the empathy that had taken root in the chaos, a fragile vine pushing through frozen soil. He met her gaze, the steam parting briefly to reveal the storm in his eyes, curiosity yielding to a deeper scrutiny. "And you," he replied, his tone low and resonant, like wind through raven's wings, "carry a heavier mark than this scratch. The way you faltered that beast. It was no accident of shadow." He stepped closer, the heat of his alpha presence cutting through the chill, stirring her omega instincts, a pull she rationalized as alliance, nothing more, though her blood hummed in quiet denial. Before she could respond, a sharper quake rattled the cavern walls, dislodging shards of ice that tinkled like shattered glass onto the stone. Eric whimpered, scooting toward the pool's edge, and Isolde felt it then, the gift manifesting, not as a controlled rite, but as a flood. Visions cascaded through her mind's eye, flashes of lunar paths, thresholds between life and the void, where souls lingered like mist under the Deuce's gaze. She saw Thorn's past, the ethical choices that had forged him, a young king sparing a rival's whelp only to invite betrayal years later. The melancholy nights pacing Raven's Reach's battlements, haunted by duties that demanded blood for peace, and deeper still, a revelation unfurling, the boy's resurrection not mere survival, but a key turning in destiny's lock. Her gift, the Pathfinder's weave, bound them. She, who crossed death's veil, was the thread to mend the fractured line of Blackthorn, revealing a hidden heirloom in Iric's blood, a lunar prophecy long buried in the clan's lore. The visions gripped her, forcing her to her knees beside the pool, her hands plunging into the steaming water unbidden. The liquid turned silver under her touch, rippling outward in concentric waves that illuminated the cavern with an otherworldly sheen, the fungi's blue yielding to the moon's pale fire reflected from above. Gasps escaped the betas emerging from the tunnels, their weapons lowered in awe. But Thorn knelt swiftly at her side, his uninjured hand grasping her shoulder, not to restrain, but to anchor. "Isolde," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, the first time he had spoken her name, a rumble that vibrated through her like thunder over snow. The contact ignited the manifestation fully. She channeled the gift outward, a pulse of moon-touched energy that sealed his wound, the flesh knitting with a faint hiss, blood staunching as if the Deusa herself had breathed mercy into the tear. He recoiled slightly, not in fear, but in the shock of realization, his gray eyes widening as the visions bled into his awareness through their touch, an instinctive alpha-omega link amplified by the rite. He saw it too, the prophecy etched in the Raven sigil, foretelling a Pathfinder Omega who would resurrect the true heir, not just in body but in spirit, to reclaim Raven's Reach from the eastern rival's shadow. Eric was no ordinary prince. His brush with death had awakened a latent power, a spiritual fire that only she could kindle, turning the tide of war from betrayal to redemption. "You are the key," Thorn whispered, his voice laced with awe and the weight of guilt transformed. No longer a solitary king burdened by failure, but one glimpsing fate's weave. "The Deuce's chosen, walking the thresholds to guide us. I summoned a shadow, but she sent a light. Isolde withdrew her hands from the pool, the water settling to clarity, the silver glow fading into steam once more. Exhaustion crashed over her, the manifestation's toll sharper than the resurrection, her vision spotting with black flecks. But beneath it bloomed a tentative warmth, the bond solidifying, resisted no longer by rational walls, though love remained a distant horizon, redemption's slow dawn. Eric reached for the raven carving, now pulsing faintly with inner light, and placed it in her palm, his touch trusting, a child's faith in the woman who had pulled him from the void. The tremors grew insistent, weavos piercing the tunnels like arrows, the rivals' forces closing in with political cunning, spies whispering of witchery to fracture loyalties. Thorn stood, pulling her up with him, their hands lingering a heartbeat too long, the empathy between them forging into resolve. "We face this together," he said, his ethical core shining through the melancholy, a king who chose compassion over conquest. Yet as they prepared to flee deeper into the labyrinth, Isolde felt the revelation's shadow. Her gift demanded more than revival. It required sacrifice, a moral crossroads where power and mercy would collide under the moon's unyielding watch. The raven in her hand warmed, a symbol of destinies entwined, as the first howls echoed into the chamber, promising judgment on the horizon. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the howls crescendoed through the labyrinth like a chorus of fractured oaths, reverberating off the ice-veined walls until the air itself seemed to pulse with their malice. Isolde clutched the raven carving tighter, its wooden form now unnaturally warm against her palm, as if the prophecy it embodied had kindled a hidden ember within. The silver glow from the pool had ebbed, leaving the cavern bathed in the fungi's ethereal blue, shadows lengthening like fingers of doubt, reaching for her throat. Thorn's hand released hers with reluctance, the brief contact lingering on her skin, a tether she both craved and feared, rationalized as the exigency of survival amid encroaching doom. Her omega blood sang of alliance, but her mind whispered caution. King's touches had felled lesser souls, turning shadows into chains. Eirik pressed against her side, his small breaths ragged. The boy's awakened spirit flickering in his eyes like moonlight on fractured ice, a latent fire she had unwittingly stoked, binding their fates in ways the Deuce's weave alone could unravel. Thorn scanned the tunnel mouths, his profile etched sharp against the dim light, the healed wound on his arm a silent testament to her gift's reach. Guilt shadowed his features still, not diminished by revelation, but deepened, the ethical weight of a king who had summoned her now compounded by the knowledge that she was no mere outcast, but the pathfinder destined to guide his line through betrayal's thorns. "The rival Alpha, Kale of the Eastern clans," he murmured, voice a gravelly undercurrent to the approaching snarls. "He who was once my ward, spared by mercy I can no longer afford. His coup reeks of old grudges, political venom laced with spiritual heresy, claiming the Deusa favors his blood over mine." Isolde's heart tightened, the visions from the manifestation replaying in staccato bursts. Kyle's youthful face, spared from execution after his father's failed rebellion, only to harbor resentment that festered into this war. The Pack's past confronted her now, not as abstract lore, but as a moral maelstrom. Thorn's compassion had sown the seeds of today's siege, a choice between forgiveness and fortitude that echoed her own life's refrain. She had walked thresholds of loss, rejecting the freedom of solitude for the burden of revival. Yet here, in this buried sanctum, freedom felt like the coward's veil. The howls sharpened, claws scraping stone perilously close, and Thorn drew his dagger once more, its runes igniting faintly in response to the raven's warmth. "We move to the heart chamber," he commanded the betas, who flanked them like spectral guardians. "There, the ancient wards may hold, if the Deusa wills it." They plunged deeper, the tunnel narrowing to a vein of black rock slick with condensation, the air thickening with the musk of earth and imminent violence. Isolde's boots slipped on icy patches, each step a negotiation with exhaustion, the right's toll gnawing deeper, her breaths fogging in plumes that mingled with the steam trailing from hidden fissures. Eric's hand found hers, small and trusting, his touch a balm against the chill of judgment looming. The boy's power hummed faintly through their joined fingers, a spiritual echo of resurrection, visions of lunar flames dancing in her periphery, promising that his bloodline held the key to Ravensreach's salvation if only they could confront the traitor who sought to extinguish it. The heart chamber opened before them abruptly, a vast hollow where crystal formations jutted from the ceiling like frozen tears, refracting the faint torchlight into prismatic shards that painted the walls in hues of white gelido and azul profundo. At its center stood a stone altar etched with the Deuce's crescent runes, the air humming with latent power, a forgotten temple buried beneath the citadel, where alphas of old had sworn oaths under the moon's gaze. Thorn barred the entrance with a massive slab, the grind of stone echoing like a final breath, but the howls persisted, now laced with human snarls. Kael's vanguard, shadow wolves herded by betas, twisted by ambition. They burst through side vents moments later, furred forms and armored figures spilling into the chamber like a tide of Cinza Asso and Vermelho Profundo. Kyle emerged at their fore, tall and lean, his eyes of venomous gold that gleamed with the fervor of the betrayed. Scars from Thorn's mercy marred his neck, a bite spared, now a badge of humiliation. "Brother in name, traitor in blood!" Kael spat, his voice slicing the hush, circling the altar with predatory grace. The pack, Thorn's own, fractured by whispers of Isolde's witchery, halted at the edges, faces a mosaic of doubt and rage, their uivos reduced to murmurs of moral fracture. "You summon death's harlot to puppeteer the air? The Deusa demands purity, not this lunar perversion. Yield Ravensreach, or watch your line crumble as mine did under your ethics." Thorn stepped forward, dagger raised but steady, his melancholy hardening into resolve, the king's frame a bastion between Isolde and the fray. "Mercy was no weakness, Kael. It was the Deuce's test, which you failed. The boy lives, the prophecy awakens. Stand down, or face judgment not from me, but from fate's weave." Isolde felt the confrontation's weight settle on her shoulders, the pack's eyes boring into her like accusations reborn. They saw her still as the widow's shadow, her resurrection a defilement, yet the raven in her grip pulsed hotter, urging her forward. Empathy warred with fear. Forgive the rival's treason for peace, or unleash her gift in war's fury, sacrificing the fragile bond with Thorn for her hard-won liberty. A shadow wolf lunged, jaws snapping, and chaos erupted, claws raking stone, blood spraying in arcs that caught the crystal light like rubies under moonlight. Thorn parried Kael's blade, their duel a whirlwind of steel and suppressed history, each clash echoing the philosophical rift, power through conquest or compassion's quiet strength. Isolde shielded Eirik behind the altar, her hand pressing the carving to the stone, the runes igniting in silver response. Visions surged again, the pack's divided souls, thresholds of choice where forgiveness could mend or war devour. A beta lunged at her, snarling of curses, and she whispered the right, not to kill, but to reveal. The wolf's eyes glazed, glimpsing his own regrets, faltering mid-strike. "What is strength?" she pondered amid the din. "If not choosing mercy when vengeance howls loudest?" Kael broke through, blade arcing toward Thorn's unguarded side, but Isolde's cry halted him, a pulse from the altar rippling outward, forcing the rival to his knees, visions of his father's fall flooding his mind. The chamber stilled, breaths heaving, blood pooling warm and viscous beneath the crystals. Thorn loomed over Kael, dagger poised, his gray eyes reflecting the moral abyss. End the traitor, secure the throne through blood, or extend the hand once offered, risking all for redemption's gamble. Isolde met his gaze across the fray, her heart a storm of dilemma, love's whisper urging union, freedom's call tempting exile anew. The pack watched, silent arbiters, as the moon's distant light filtered through a crevice, illuminating the choice that could crown or shatter them. In that suspended breath, the raven's warmth spread like fire through frost, binding past to present, but the judgment hung unresolved, a spiritual precipice where one step meant war's embrace, or the fragile dawn of pardon. The crystal light fractured across Chaol's kneeling form, splintering into shards that danced like accusations on the blood-slicked stone, each prism a mirror to the rival's twisted face, gold eyes wide with the visions Isolde's pulse had forced upon him. The chamber's air hung thick, saturated with the coppery reek of spilled life and the acrid tang of sweat-soaked fur, the distant weavos of the shadow wolves fading into a hollow echo, as if the mountain itself held its breath. Isolde's fingers tightened around the raven carving, its warmth now a searing brand against her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heart, a relentless drum that drowned the chaos, binding her to this precipice where mercy and vengeance blurred like mist under the moon. Thorn's dagger hovered, its rune-etched blade catching the prismatic glow, trembling not from fatigue, but from the ethical storm raging in his gray eyes. He loomed over Chaol, the king's broad frame casting a long shadow that swallowed the altar's runes, his breath ragged plumes in the chill. Guilt etched deeper lines into his face, the melancholy that had shadowed him since the coup now a chasm. To strike would end the threat, securing his throne through the very blood he had once spared. But it would shatter the Deusa's weave, the prophecy that named compassion as the true crown. Isolde felt it through their nascent bond, a thread of empathy pulling taut, his internal war mirroring her own, the Omega's instinct to flee warring with the Pathfinder's call to stand, to choose union over the solitude that had armored her for decades. The pack encircled them, a ring of fractured loyalties, alphas with claws extended, betas gripping spears that dripped crimson, omegas whispering prayers to the Deusa, their eyes flicking between king and traitor. Whispers slithered through the hush. Witchery binds the air, one snarled. Her shadow taints the bloodline, rekindling the chants that had haunted Isolde's exiles, turning her revelation into fresh condemnation. She rose from behind the altar, Eric's small hand still clasped in hers, the boy's awakened fire flickering brighter now, a golden spark in his blue gaze that illuminated the chamber like inner moonlight. He squeezed her fingers, a silent plea, his latent power humming through her veins, a reminder that her gift had not just revived him, but ignited a destiny where his spirit could rally the divided, if forgiveness prevailed over war's howl. Chaol laughed, a bitter rasp that cut the tension like shattered ice, pushing to his feet with defiant grace, his scarred neck gleaming pale under the crystals. "See your king's folly," he addressed the pack, voice laced with political venom, eyes sweeping the circle to sow deeper discord. "He spared me once, cloaking betrayal in mercy's name, and now invites death's consort to puppeteer our fates. The Deusa whispers of purity through strength. Yield to me, and Raven's Reach rises untainted. Or cling to this lunar fraud, and watch your world bleed." His words struck like barbs, stirring murmurs into growls, the pack's moral fractures widening. Some shifted toward him, drawn by the promise of unyielding power. Others held firm, loyalty to Thorn a fragile bulwark against the tide. Isolde stepped forward, the raven carving thrust before her like a talisman, its heat spreading through her arm, urging the gift to unfurl once more. Exhaustion clawed at her edges, the rite's accumulated toll a vice around her lungs, but the vision surged anew. Thresholds of choice branching like frozen rivers. Forgive Chaol, mend the pack through her Pathfinder's grace, and bind to Thorn in a love born of shared redemption. Or renounce it all, unleashing the rite's full fury to shatter the rival, claiming freedom at the cost of the boy's light and the king's soul. Her heart ached with the weight, romantic tragedy weaving through the pain, the tenderness she glimpsed in Thorn's stolen glances, resisted as duty's illusion, now demanding acceptance amid the blood and crystal glare. What is freedom, she pondered, if it leaves the soul adrift in endless winter, when compassion might forge a hearth from ashes? Thorn's gaze locked on hers across the divide, a silent question in the storm of his eyes, the dagger lowering fractionally. "Kyle," he said, voice steady as mountainstone, though laced with the melancholy of irretrievable loss. "Your grudge blinds you to the Deuce's truth. The prophecy awakens not in conquest, but in the choice to heal what war rends. Stand with us, or fall alone." The pack stilled, breaths sinking in collective suspense, the air electric with spiritual tension, the moon's distant pull filtering through the crevice above, silvering the blood pools into mirrors of potential ruin. Kyle lunged, blade flashing in an arc of desperate fury, but Isolde's will intervened, the raven pulsing silver light that rippled outward, forcing him to stagger, visions of his own thresholds crashing upon him, a life spared. Twisted into treason, the Deuce's mercy mocked by his ambition. He dropped to one knee again, gasping, the pack's growls fracturing into uncertainty, some advancing on him, others turning eyes of dawning awe to Isolde, the widow's shadow transfigured into the light that pierced betrayal's veil. Thorn sheathed his dagger, extending a hand not to strike, but to offer, his ethical core prevailing in the face of war's temptation. "Choose," he urged Kale, and through him, the pack, the moral crossroads laid bare, forgiveness a bridge over the abyss of endless conflict. Yet, as Kale's hand twitched toward the offered palm, a shadow wolf's howl pierced from the tunnels, heralding reinforcements, the rivals' full force swelling like a storm. Isolde felt the dilemma sharpen to a blade's edge. Her bond with Thorn tugged toward union, a love resisted but inevitable, promising redemption's warmth. Freedom whispered of retreat, leaving the pack to their fates, her gift unclaimed in isolation. Eric's fire blazed brighter in her grasp, the boy's voice breaking the hush. "She brought me back. Mercy is our strength," a child's truth that echoed the Deuce's whisper, urging the choice that could rebirth them all or doom the realm to shadowed war. The crystals hummed, the raven burned, and in that visceral hush, Isolde stood at the threshold, heart torn between the pull of destiny's embrace and the solitude's cold allure, the pack's fates hanging on the mercy she alone could crown. The crystal's hum deepened into a resonant threnody, vibrating through the heart chamber like the Deuce's own pulse, as Isolde's grip on the raven carving tightened, its feverish warmth seeping into her veins like molten silver. The air thickened with the scent of blood and frost-kissed stone, the prismatic light fracturing across Kyle's upturned face, illuminating the raw fracture of his ambition, gold eyes flickering not with defeat, but with the dawning horror of thresholds glimpsed and spurned. Thorn's extended hand hung suspended, a bridge of scarred flesh and unyielding ethics. His gray gaze locked on hers across the bloodied expanse, pleading without words for the choice that could redeem them both. The pack encircled the altar, their forms a tableau of tension, furred cloaks heavy with the night's gore, breaths fogging in ragged unison, the murmurs of doubt yielding to a profound silence broken only by the distant howl of shadow wolves clawing at the barred tunnels. Isolde's heart thundered, a visceral storm where Omega instinct clashed with the Pathfinder's inexorable call, freedom's chill whisper tempting her to unleash the right's fury, to shatter Kale and flee into the labyrinth's endless night, leaving the pack to devour itself in war's maw. Yet the bond with Thorn pulled like lunar tide, resisted no longer by rational veils. It was a quiet fire kindled in refuge's depths, empathy forged into something deeper, a love that demanded not possession, but mutual rebirth. Eric's small hand squeezed hers, his awakened spirit flaring golden in the crystal glare, a child's untainted faith anchoring her to the moment. The rite stirred within, its toll a hollow ache in her bones, years already pilfered now demanding more, a sacrifice of essence to heal the fractures, to crown mercy over power's blade. What is redemption, she thought amid the din of her pulse, if not stepping across the void to claim the light on the other side? Cale's hand rose, trembling, inches from Thorn's, his voice a fractured rasp that echoed off the rune-etched walls. You offer chains disguised as grace, brother. The Dusa favors the strong, not this. This spectral whore who peddles life like a beggar. The slur struck like a lash, rekindling the pack's chants in scattered growls. She brings only death. But Isolde felt no sting, only resolve blooming from the pain, her gift surging as she pressed the raven to the altar. Silver light erupted from the stone, rippling outward in waves that washed over the chamber, forcing visions upon the divided, thresholds of lost kin, betrayals born of unchecked wrath, the Dusa's moonlit judgment revealing paths untaken. Cale gasped, his body convulsing as the weight of his father's fall, spared by Thorn's mercy only to fuel his own, crushed him anew, not in vengeance, but in revelation's unsparing mirror. The rival Alpha collapsed fully, not slain, but broken. His blade clattering to the stone as sobs tore from his throat, the pack's loyalty fracturing like ice under spring's thaw. Alphas lowered their claws, betas sheathed spears with hesitant clinks, omegas stepping forward with eyes wide in spiritual awe, the widow's shadow transfigured before them into the light that mended what war had rent. Thorn knelt beside Cale, his hand clasping the rivals at last, not in conquest, but in the ethical embrace of forgiveness, a king's melancholy yielding to the quiet strength of compassion, guilt alchemized into purpose. Rise, he commanded softly, his voice threading through the hush like wind over snow, and witness the Dusa's weave. No more blood for thrones. We rebuild as one or fall divided. Isolde felt the rite's demand peak, a searing pull at her core, the sacrifice crystallizing in her mind. To cure the pack's wounds, body and soul, she must pour her remaining vitality into the altar's runes, crossing one final threshold, not for exile, but for union. Her vision blurred, the chamber tilting as years unraveled like mist from her frame, her skin paling to the white gelato of eternal snow. But she held firm, the raven glowing brighter as Irik's fire leaped to meet her gift. Golden flames wove with silver light, enveloping the pack in a visceral warmth that knit gashes and soothed spirits, the air filling with the scent of blooming nightshade and fresh-fallen frost, a rebirth under the moon's distant vigil. Howls from the tunnels faltered, shadow wolves whining in retreat, the rivals' forces dissolving into the mountain's embrace as the prophecy fulfilled itself, the air's light, kindled by the Pathfinder, rallying the realm from betrayal's brink. Thorn rose, turning to her as the light crested and faded, his arms encircling her weakening form with a tenderness born of shared trials. The Alpha's heat, a bulwark against her fading chill, their bond sealing in that embrace. Love accepted not as reward, but as the hard-won proof of souls entwined. You chose us, he whispered, his lips brushing her temple, gray eyes shimmering with unshed tears, the melancholy lifted by redemption's dawn. And in choosing, you have crowned us all. Isolde leaned into him, the exhaustion a gentle tide now, her heart sinking with his in rhythmic peace, the solitude of decades dissolving into the warmth of pack and purpose. Irik hugged her waist, the raven carving cool at last in her palm, a symbol reborn from wood to legacy. The chamber's crystals dimmed to a soft azure, the pack gathering close in unified howls that rose like a hymn to the Dusa, echoing through Raven's Reach's veins to the snow-capped peaks above. Blood and frost mingled on the stone, but the stains faded under the rite's grace, leaving only the promise of spring beneath winter's veil. Isolde closed her eyes, the wind from a high crevice whispering benedictions. Her sacrifice not an end, but a threshold crossed into healing, love as the ultimate renascimento, where rejection yielded to eternal union under the moon's compassionate gaze. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.